Hello, class. This is your professor, Dr. Brian Lippincott, and I want to give you an example and a talk about how the world is changing and how our human identities are growing and developing, and therefore depth psychology and Jungian psychology need to change. So, as your professor, I want to try to make sure that we have an open classroom and that we have a place where we can discuss these things on re-envisioning. And envisioning is a word comes from James Hillman, envisioning. So I'm reimagining the contrasexual. The theory that Jung had was that every man had an anima and every woman had an animus. Now we're going to deconstruct that a little bit and discuss that. This lecture is about analytical psychology in the era of queer theory and gender fluidity. We have a fluid society now that we have a lot of things that we have in the Western world that are really our material good things. We can have time and leisure to deal with things as did the ancient Greeks, and a lot of indigenous peoples structure their lives so they have time and explore some of these things. Let us explore what we know about ourselves. This is me and the ontological foundations of the Syzygy. The Syzygy is the anima animus, the two, and there's always an interconnection. And ontological is how we know things and the being of things. Concepts of anima and animus form the core tradition of analytical psychology, and it serves the embedded echoes of the contrasexual forces within the human psyche. These archetypes, conceived in the early 1920s, represent internal opposites, deeply rooted facets that act as bridges between the conscious ego and the vast, mysterious realm of the collective unconscious. Jung envisioned the anima as the poetic embodiment of the feminine psychological qualities dwelling within a man, while the animus manifests as the masculine spirit within the woman. Anima in Greek means soul. Animus in Greek means spirit. So when we can discuss what kind of complexes that cause between logos and eros, for instance. The intrinsic duality weaves a poetic tapestry illustrating how the human mind harbors hidden depths and qualities, latent and often submerged. They're latent and they're submerged, they're pushed unconscious by a lot of people that emerge anew through a transformative voyage of individuation, which is all based basically on making the unconscious conscious. And here we are, going on a journey here of indicating a lot. You see the ladder here. If we look up, re-envisioning the contrasexual analytical psychology in the era of queer theory and gender fluidity. So, and it shows the ladder of, on one side, individuation, that ladder, they're going up to that, an embodiment. And these are us going on this journey together here. I'd like to have you see that because that is a wonderful picture that depicts what we're doing. Traditional Jungian theory posits that these archetypes are deeply rooted in the collective unconscious, a shared evolutionary reservoir of imagery and ancestral memory passed down through generations. The anima is frequently associated with emotionality, sensitivity, and innate relatedness. So in Jung's traditional theory, the feminine part of the man is that intuitive, sensitive, while the animus, the masculine part of the woman, is linked to logic, assertiveness, and engagement with the external world. Jung hypothesized that these figures develop through distinct stages of maturation. For the animus, the progression moves from the man of more physical power, the Tarzan, to the man as a spiritual guide, Hermes. So it's totally different. As you transform, you go from the more instinctual to the more spiritual many times in individuation, while the anima evolves from biological instinct to transcendent wisdom. So you have the anima, the traditional definition, the archetypal function, and the developmental goal. And that's, as we'll talk later on in another lecture about Freud and Jung and how they developed this, and what caused the break in them was that Jung was advocating for more of a androgynous type of being, which we'll talk about. And that's in another lecture. So we have the traditional, the anima, unconscious feminine side of a man, emotionality, soul linked, relatedness, integration of receptivity and feeling. That's the developmental goal. The animus, unconscious side of a woman. Now, this is traditional, intellectual power, social action, logic, integration of assertiveness and logos. And the Syzygy is the divine couple. And that's a pair. And we really want it. So Jung felt that having a balance, having a totality of being to access both of those, it doesn't mean anything physical or about necessarily your sexual orientation or where your desires go. It's how you relate to these different ways of functioning that are if we called it yin and yang, we would understand it in a different way that wouldn't be so pejorative in many ways. I think yin and yang is a good way to think about it, though. Psychic, I think, and Jung was well aware of Chinese wisdom and Taoism and all that. Psychic wholeness and transcendence. In fact, Tony Wolff often argued the side of the Eastern religions with Jung, and Jung being focused more on the central figure, on Jesus, and from his Christian background of having his grandfather and his father back many generations be ministers. And on the other side, Tony Wolff would many times, although she became a devout Catholic in the end, but she would advocate for Jung bringing in the Eastern religions, which he did. The interaction between ego and these figures is vital for the process of individuation, the lifelong journey becoming a complete unified self. When the anima or animus is successfully integrated, it serves as a link between the conscious mind and the unconscious depths, fostering creativity and spiritual growth. However, when these archetypes remain unintegrated, they often manifest that through projection into external partners or through possession, where the individual is seized by stereotypical traits of the archetype. I've had that happen to me when I was in high school. It was the football, it was the Tarzan, it was this I'm tough, and it was like I was possessed by that patriarchal masculine archetype, and it was really supported. That's how I got a scholarship to St. Mary's and was able to get into the Great Books program. But I've experienced that self when you have that patriarchal self. And then here's me talking to a couple of women who are in a relationship, and we are discussing some of these issues in them. And this is in situations like this is where I came up with my own inner belief is we both have both, and if we really want to integrate, we will in the individuate, we will develop both sides of that. And if you notice that if you see older couples that have been together 50 years, they actually even start to look like each other in some ways, whether they're gay or straight or whatever. And this is the possession here of being possessed by the anima in a sense. And I have a better way of looking at that maybe is I saw my wife, Linda, across a crowded room, and I was in love right away. Boom. I was possessed by it. Was like, you don't have a complex. The complex has you. That's the saying. Essentialism and the heteronormative paradigm. Let's deconstruct this a little bit. A primary point of friction between traditional Jungian theory and contemporary gender studies is the perceived essentialism of the anima and anima. So essentialism refers to the belief that gendered traits are inherent and immutable and biologically or archetypally determined. That's essentialism. It has to be that way. Critics argue that Jung's description of masculine logic and feminine emotion reflect a Platonic ontology where reality is governed by eternal fixed archetypes that do not account for cultural construction of gender roles. And I really believe a lot in Joseph Henderson's, the famous and really wonderful. He's passed away now, looked like Yoda. He was a little man, but he had a great power. But one of the things he came up with was the cultural unconscious. And so you have the personal unconscious, which is what Freud talked about. You have, according to Henderson, the cultural unconscious, where these cultural things act. And then deep down in the collective unconscious, those are like the Platonic ontology where they're governed by eternal things that aren't fixed, though. I am personally a firm believer, which is a whole other lecture, that the archetypes can evolve. That's a liberation theology. It started in Pablo Fiore and all those people. There's an activism movement where maybe God evolves, and maybe he does, because in the Old Testament he blows up people. In the New Testament he's asking for forgiveness and sending his son. So there is some evolution in the morality of God in some ways. So the key term here is the heteronormative structure of the traditional model assumes that the contrasexual must always be the opposite of biological sex. In this view, a man has a anima because he has a male body. Contemporary scholars note that this logic fails to address the experiences of many people, non-binary, transgender, and queer individuals whose internal identity does not align with the binary biological starting place, or people that are asexual or do not, or celibate. There's all different variations on this. So let's look at another chart here. We have the traditional Jungian approach and the contemporary gender theory, the origins of gender, archetypal inheritance, biological opposite in Jungian theory, contemporary gender theory, social construction, performative repetition. So you learn to be a boy or girl, especially in gender, binary, male or female, spectrum, fluid, non-binary. It used to be back in the 1930s, I wasn't there, but I know those television shows, and that's where my parents came up. My dad was born in 1917 and my mom in 1925. And they had this. A man was supposed to be a man. It was like John Wayne, and you knew who you were. A woman is supposed to be like Scarlett O'Hara. They really had these firm constrictions on gender that by the time I came around, I was born in 1956, there was still a lot of challenge, but I had a sister who was 12 years older than me. Her name was Glinda, and she really was a good witch. And she started introducing me to the ideas that there people could be more fluid and the world is more complex than my mom and dad saw it. And my sister was a big part of raising me. So, rule of the body, anatomical sex determines the contrasexual. Nowadays, gender emerges through an embodied experience. It emerges from your experience of yourself. And that does include physical things, but it's not determined by that. Pathology, nonconformity, as if possessed by or split, and what we have in contemporary gender theory, distress as a result of systemic transphobia, and a lot of phobias, and a lot of isms, which I have a whole cartoon about that. Furthermore, the language used to describe the anima and animus is often cited as a form of cultural gaslighting. Terms like emasculation and effemination imply that to lose power is to become more feminine, to lose power, while power itself is equated with masculinity. This linguistic bias suggests that the very framework of analytical psychology may be compromised by the heteropatriarchal complex, a cultural construct that privileges white heterosexual male perspectives and standardizes the nuclear family as the only healthy psychic outcome. And many theorists believe, which I'll go into this and other about the heretical nature of this, but many theorists of this are to support the capitalist economic system and make sure that the property is kept with the male line. That's part of the heteropatriarchal complex. And I can tell you a story about that. I had a colleague who was a woman, but she came from the island of Guam, and they're called the Chamorro people to themselves. And she told a story about in her history, for a long time, Guam was owned by the Spanish and got to have lived the way they normally lived as indigenous people. And all the property and all the names were passed down on the matriarchal side from mother to mother. But I believe it was when Guam became a territory of the United States early in the 20th century, they made them change all the names and all the property to the father's name, to the man. And that caused this whole shift in their whole culture, which caused their whole psychology to change and a lot of different things. So led me to believe more in the social constructionist side of things in this particular issue, especially the post-Jungian turn, decoupling, the archetypal fluidity. And we have the post-Jungians, and now I believe I call myself with Stefano Capani and several others as neo-Jungian. In response to these critiques, post-Jungian scholars have aimed to detach the anima and animus from biological sex. My professor, James Hillman, the founder of Archetypal Psychology, argued that the anima should be viewed as an archetype of psychic interiority, your inner self, or soul making. The soul, it's our deep inner imagination, but not in the way you usually think of imagination, but as our inner sphere of knowledge and self, regardless of the individual's gender. In Hillman's reformulation of Jung's theory, the animus represents the archetype of external engagement and spirit, freeing these concepts from gender essentialism, as we talked about before. June Singer similarly challenged the rigid gender binaries by promoting the archetype of the androgyne as the higher stage of human consciousness. And June Singer was a colleague of Sandra Bem, who created the Bem scale, which is you have strong masculine gender over here, strong feminine, and everybody's on a continuum. And that continuum moves as you age. And I feel somewhat because of just aging and being in my 70th year, I've started to finally integrate some of the feminine in some ways that I wasn't allowing myself to before. Singer posited that the psychological wholeness requires the integration of both masculine and feminine principles within every soul, viewing them as complementary energies rather than sex-linked traits. This new androgyny offers a psychological space where individuals can have access to both assertive power and receptive love without being constrained by societal gender norms, without being constrained. And we have all these constraints. The shift allows us to be more transgendered, for a more transgendered perspective. And it used to be in the 1930s, you had to have a solid self and be a man or a woman. Now, the more healthy people have more fluid identities. For instance, and I call them ego states. And the reason is, if you saw me playing with my little 1-year-old granddaughter, that I would be a totally different person than when I'm teaching this class, and a totally different person when I'm at a 49ers football game. Those are different. I'm going to act totally from different gender positions in those different situations. Okay, here are the different scholars. Goldenberg, June Singer, James Hillman. He decouples AA from biological sex, anima animus from biological sex, metaphorically soul making, and he ends strict gender essentialism and archetypal theory. And James Hillman really deconstructed many things except the soul. He was essentialist in a few ways, but he really challenged the essentialism of gender in many ways. June Singer, the androgyne as the model for psychological wholeness. How androgynous can you be? How can you have different ego states where you use different parts of yourself? That reminds me of personality. When I first started on the field, we had, and when I learned the DSM-2 from Gordon Holub in 1980, 79, I think it was one personality disorder. And it was called personality or something like that. But there was one. And then later we came with histrionic and paranoid and narcissistic and dependent. We came with a whole name of those afterwards. But the inadequate personality meant that you were stuck in one spot. Like you're afraid of everything, but you couldn't. All of us have all those different. Sometimes it's good to be a little narcissistic in the morning and comb your hair and brush your teeth and take a shower or whatever. It's good to be a little bit histrionic when something is going on and you really need to express those things that we pathologize are normal in a way. And we really want to be more fluid. So a personality disorder is when you get stuck in one way of operating, like a paranoid way. Okay. Greenberg. Anima and animus as capacities for affiliation and action. So the masculine, so-called masculine principle is the action, affiliation and connection and tending and befriending is the feminine, and we all have both. Reinterprets archetypes through functional relationships. Naomi Goldenberg, a wonderful therapist. Paula Young Eisendrath, taken several classes from her, critiques Jung's anima as a personal complex, highlights the subjectivity of the traditional model. That's Polly's approach. And she's the creator of dialogue therapy and is a famous, if you want to study Jungian couples therapy, um, is having a certificate in that. Paula Young Eisendrath teaches dialogue therapy, and she has a whole theory. Her first book, Hags into Heroes. Hags and Heroes was famous, and she's done a lot of work with couples. Okay. Revisions have paved the way for more inclusive clinical practices. How does this change for the clinician? Some contemporary analysts suggest that non-binary individuals, the contrasexual figure, may not be a person of the opposite gender, but rather an embodied sentient figure. And I want to give a quote of one of my colleagues. I worked at a place called St. George Holmes, and our psychiatrist for about a year, which taught me so much, was a man named Donald Sandner. Well, he wrote an article which is published in the book Same Sex Love, edited by Robert Hopke, Karen Loftus Carrington, and Scott Worth, and its perspectives on gay and lesbian psychological development. And 220 of that book, in his article, Donald Sandner says, Jung also said, when projected, the anima always has a feminine form with definite characteristics, as we were talking about. Here, with due regard for pioneering effort, and this is Sandner saying, here, with due regard for pioneering efforts, for Jung's pioneering efforts, I part company with Jung. His statement is certainly true for a predominantly heterosexual male, but says, but years of clinical work persuade me that it is not entirely true for homosexual, bisexual, or even psychically bisexual men. And what are psychically bisexual men? In parentheses, he says, those who have internalized their love of other men and have not developed outer sexual pathways for it. Or maybe they're more introverted. That was my parenthetical comment there. And he goes on, every shade of variation exists among the heterosexual continuum, and we have only the vaguest notion why things turn out as they do. But for these men, the anima encountered inwardly in dreams and outwardly in projected terms often appears in the image of another man. Now, in traditional Jungian, we would be taught that when another man, that would be the shadow. But no, a man figure in your dreams can represent an anima. And especially now that we have more gender fluidity, there are many more, the guy that plays in Pirates of the Caribbean, his character is very blended in a sense. And there's so many characters. Susan, and which we can go in more to that. Susan McKenzie in the paradigm of emergence. Susan McKenzie's work, especially the 2006 paper, Queering Gender, Anima and Animus and the Paradigm of Emergence. And she's talking about emergence of complexity and emergence in the brain. And that paper marked, to me, a significant effort to connect contemporary neuroscience, queer theory, and analytical psychology. McKenzie challenges the traditional view of gender as an archetypal inheritance and instead advocates for the paradigm of emergence, which sees gendered feeling as a self-organizing process of mind. The process is shaped by three main factors: body biology, the experiencing of the body, the somatic interface that we all have; brain development, meaning your attachment experiences which form early on; and the cultural environment. Number three, they're all basically all interacting to provide this paradigm of emergence. And they're self-organizing, so they self-correct for things in the culture and in the experiences of the person. So if the zombies attack, you might become more masculine, or maybe you become better at hiding and more, whatever. From the perspective of emergent mind theory, an individual's sense of gender emerges in early development. McKenzie asked how gender feelings in the developing body elaborate into a conscious gender position of the mind. This both and approach seeks to move beyond the binary opposition of male masculinity and female femininity, allowing for a transgenderedness that provides greater versatility for all individuals. McKenzie utilizes cognitive and developmental neuroscience to argue that the brain is embodied Okay. I work at a place in Santa Cruz called the Center for Embodiment Medicine, and I'm a supervisor there. That when we embody, we mean bring it into your body, and what in the body and the soul are working together. Embodied, and the body is embedded in a particular cultural milieu. The factor in emergence, role in gender formation, implications for analytical psychology, the body biology. The experienced body is a key to mind emergence. You can, if you're not gonna, if you don't have a body, you're not gonna. We don't know what happened. Maybe we're just a radio receiver for the big mind, but the body is very important. Moves gender from abstract archetype to physical reality. Brain and attachment, your early attachment, interplay of body development and early relationships, links gender development to developmental psychoanalysis. The cultural milieu, external feedback and social assumptions. All the tiny asking for help, all the tiny little linguistic things that we say. That's why language is so important. This is like a capillary system, the cultural milieu that feeds the body and the brain and the psyche and the soul. Acknowledges the pre-printed manual for gender roles. Cultural milieu really has cultural specifications. McKenzie's revisionist theory aligns with the Jung of the symbolic, emphasizing that gender fluidity is a shifting reality rather than a hardwired fiction. She explores the emergence of same-sex desire at midlife as the window into the body-mind movement of gender emergence. And that happens. My colleagues wrote a book about that. Happy Wife to Lesbian Life or something like that. Oh, I'll think about it in a minute. But anyway, that is something that happens a lot, where gender can shift as you age, suggesting that such transitions can facilitate gender development and expansion. So maybe nowadays we're working more towards expanding our gender abilities or our gender openness. Her work highlights transgender feelings. Those do not fit into cultural assumptions and are often hidden or denied expression, and coming out of the gender sexuality closet offers a glimpse into the potential interactions between sexuality and gender identity. They're not the same thing, but they definitely interact and they emerge into new paradigms for people beyond the either or. Okay, the Zurich Conference and the Queer Heart of Individuation. There was a conference in Zurich. In 2024, the Zurich Conference brought together the leading voices in the field to explore the queer heart of individuation, marking the pivotal movement for the Journal of Analytical Psychology. The collection of papers challenges ideas of a divided gender archetypal structure. The Journal of Analytical Psychology had a special issue and instead encourages the field to consider notions of archetypal gender deviance. George Tacitus, for example, draws on the Skatopoulos work to describe a trauma-phobic approach to common traditional theory. A trauma-phobic approach. This perspective often sees unconventional gender and sexuality through a trauma lens or as a focus on origins rather than accepting them as a natural part of the self. So again, it's reducing it in kind of a psychoanalytic or Freudian way down to there's something wrong with your early attachment or something like that. That is something Thomas explores the duality of the heretical and the dogmatic, illustrating their negative effects through the experiences of transgender individuals harmed by orthodox Jungian approaches. These approaches often see gender, sex, and sexuality only as symbolic archetypes, ignoring the actual physical expression of the body. To address this, Perrin introduces the idea of a new archetype called Anima, representing, and it's hard to pronounce, but these are all Latin and Greek, so I've had a little bit of those, but represented by a triangular landscape where sex, gender, and sexuality exist without a fixed foundation, requiring ongoing exploration, which is really more what life is all about. We never get to with gender. Individuation is a really important goal, but we never really get there. Paul Antonello, queer identity and spirituality is his focus, the queer heart of individuation. George Tacitus, pathologizing of queer identities, traumaphobic and part object relating critique. So he discussed some of the, it's a part object. You're relating to people by their penis or by their vagina or their breasts or those kind of things. You're reducing people to a part. James Perrin, dynamic model of sexuality. The Anonym, gender, sex, and spirituality form a triangle. So he believes your sex, your biology, your gender, your social constructions, and your spirituality all form a triangle. Naomi Azarel, one of my professors in Stefano Capani and Pacifica's Neo-Jungian Psychology Masterclass, non-binary potential, the non-binary soul, and the liberatory gender stance. We want to liberate people from being in this binary box so they can experience more of their true life. These scholars contend that to truly ignite contemporary theory, we must embrace and honor queer journeys as a vital threads of our collective tapestry, both in the historical roots and mythic archetypes. Azrael highlights these healing and freeing power within the non-binary soul, envisioning the potential as a spark capable of igniting a profound archetypal revolution towards new horizons. Kerbel, imagining a fresh epistemological landscape, what we can know, what epistemology is the science of knowledge, suggests that analytical psychology can finally give voice to stories, narratives long buried, transforming from rigid Jungian doctrines into a canvas for rich, meaning, personal narratives that dance in an embodied body with life's mysterious depths in the James Hillman's soul making. Clinical confrontations. I think this is enough for today. And so, class, thank you very much. And I really appreciate your attention. And we're going to continue this on in our next, to talk about more about where this leads now in the current contemporary times. Bye-bye.